It is, of course, the story that President Trump just can't seem to shake as the calls grow louder from both the public and across the aisle for the Department of Justice to release more information in the Jeffrey Epstein case. Over the weekend, Mr. Trump calling the case the, quote, Jeffrey Epstein hoax, blaming Democrats and what he calls troublemakers for the controversy. Meantime, the growing number of lawmakers demanding action on a resolution co-sponsored by Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie and California progressive Ro Khanna. That push would force the full House to vote, yes or no, on releasing the Epstein case files. Among the co-signers, 16 lawmakers who typically would not agree on, frankly, much of anything, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Another co-signer, Republican Tim Burch of Tennessee, says the recent decision by the Trump administration to try to unseal grand jury testimony is just the beginning.
On my bill to release the Epstein files, not only do I have Republican Thomas Massie, I got Marjorie Taylor Greene, I got Lauren Boebert, I got Tim Buchheit.
I applaud the president for wanting to release those files. I think it's a good start. I caution America, though, if we need to have some sort of way to filter out the innocence in these things.
Democrats really leaning into this moment as a way to needle the president after 6 months of a presidency which has largely dismantled any opposition attempting to stand in Trump's way.
So the president blaming Democrats for this disaster, Jake, is like that CEO that got caught on camera blaming Coldplay, okay? Like, this is his making.
It all comes back to the KISS camp, but we're going to hold that for a little bit later in the show. Joining me now to discuss, Isaac Dovere, CNN senior reporter, Sarah Fisher, CNN media analyst, and Michael Warren, senior editor at The Dispatch. Good to see all of you bright and early on this Monday morning. Isaac, when we start with these efforts that we're seeing here, these bipartisan efforts in the House, there's a question of whether or not you can get enough yes votes. There's also a question of what does this actually do?
Yeah, and this is something that will take time, and time may not be in favor of those who want this to go away. Even if the grand jury testimony is released, that could take weeks, it could take longer, and all along the way we have just conversations about this, questions about it, and it's clearly not going the way that some people want it to, even as the president has tried to say stop talking about this and tell his allies in politics and conservative media to stop talking about it. I mean, I was really struck by last night, Mike Johnson was on with Mark Levin, the conservative host, and said that he was agreeing that we can't waste our time on Epstein and other stuff going on here. That's what Levin was saying. Johnson was agreeing. This was Johnson just last Tuesday. He said it's a very delicate subject, but we should put everything out there and let the people decide it. That's the pickle that people who have really engaged in this conspiracy for years find themselves in here. They've talked it up. They've said that there's more stuff, and now that the president is there going in saying that he was going to get all this stuff released, and J.D. Vance and Kash Patel and all the rest, they have to figure out how they're going to say that there's not more stuff to release.
You know, I think you point out an important point, right, that there is still potentially weeks to come just because of the calendar of all things. And to that point, Michael, as we look at where things stand, despite all of these efforts and maybe distraction with other stories or, you know, simply the president trying to dictate by Truth Social post, it's remarkable that none of that seems to be working.
It is. You would think all the things that Donald Trump's supporters have been maybe at odds with or in contradiction or some sort of cognitive dissonance with Donald Trump, he's been able to overcome that. This is different, I think in some ways, partly because Donald Trump is, at this point, a lame duck president. There's no other election for him to run in, and I think a lot of people are thinking about what happens after he's gone. It's also something that's really become sort of a core tenet, almost a quasi-religious belief among a certain portion, a very vocal portion of his base, and that's not so easy to wave away. Look, I think there are a lot of people taking advantage, say on the Democratic side, of that cognitive dissonance and trying to sort of poke fun at this. But we're also getting in kind of a dangerous territory here where the conspiracy theories begin to, you start making fun, you start sort of poking and saying, hey, look at this contradiction, and then you start sort of feeding into those same conspiracy theories that there's something here. The basic facts of the case are already out there. I have some questions specifically about Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 plea deal with the Department of Justice. That's something that would be interesting, but the sort of more titillating aspects of this, we know what the story is. We know what he did. We know what Ghislaine Maxwell did. She's in jail right now because of it. There's not much more there, but these politicians can't help themselves in playing into it. And I think it's a real problem on both sides of the aisle here.
Sarah, somewhat to that point, it is really something how this is gaining steam on a much broader, or with a much broader audience, right, than where it initially began. In fact, my colleague Brian Selter pointing out that a search of Epstein's name on YouTube filtered only to show videos uploaded in the last week found more than 40 with more than 1 million views each, a number of them featuring late-night TV hosts roasting Trump. But the fact that this has found such a broader audience and has some staying power also speaks to the narrative in many ways.
Absolutely. So when you take a look at the issue that's at the core of the Epstein case, there's actually two. One is child exploitation, which has always been such an issue on the right and amongst Trump's base. And then the other is deep state cover-up, right? Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, ahead of entering the FBI, a big rallying cry was the deep state, the government is trying to cover this up. And so this was a core case for the MAGA right. And how this has evolved is Democrats are now seizing on this issue because, to Michael's point, when there's a lack of information or it looks like there's information being covered up, that's the best way for conspiracies to fester. And Democrats are seizing on that opportunity, seizing on some of these conspiracies to try to put pressure on the president. This has now then created a situation where this topic, this story, is hot on both sides of the political aisle. Both sides have something to politically gain from it. And so that's why, in part, it's becoming so viral. I also think that this is one of those things where every time Donald Trump or an ally tries to, fan the flames and say there's nothing to see here, it motivates people to say, hey, wait a minute, I think there is something to see here. And so I don't think that this is going away from the news cycle anytime soon. And just to the point at the top about this lingering, Isaac was saying this, you have Congress coming back to vote if they were to do something, Ro Khanna and Massey, in September. We are still in July, Erica, so this is like 6 to 8 weeks where this is going to continue to build up until Congress, if they do, can take any action on it.
Polls show that Americans are paying attention to the recent revelations in the Epstein case. CNN chief data analyst Harry Enton now with what the numbers tell us about how the public and the president's base feel about the story that won't seem to go away.
Interest in the Epstein files and the Epstein case is sky high, and the American public does not trust what the government is selling them. What are we talking about here? Is the government hiding Epstein's alleged client? Let's get this. 69% of Americans agree that the federal government is, in fact, hiding Epstein's alleged client list versus just 6% who say that they are not. And get this, a majority of Republicans and Democrats do in fact agree on this issue that the government is hiding Epstein's alleged client list. You can never get a majority of Republicans and Democrats to agree on anything, but they do agree on this particular issue. And perhaps not so surprisingly, you get a plurality of Democrats and Republicans agreeing that they are dissatisfied with the amount of information that the government has released so far. What are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about, if we look at Republicans and independents who lean Republican, 43% are dissatisfied with the amount of information released so far, compared to, get this, just 4% of Republicans who are in fact satisfied with the amount of information released so far by the federal government when it comes to the Epstein case. And we look over here on this side of the screen among Democrats, get this, 60% of Democrats and independent-leaning Democrats are in fact dissatisfied with the amount of information released so far. And get this, just 3% of Democrats are in fact satisfied so far with the amount of information released. Now you see this, you see that the plurality of Republicans are dissatisfied. So how is it impacting President Trump's overall approval rating? Republicans who approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing, get this, in our CNN SSRS poll, it was 86% prior to this whole Epstein saga. Now it's 88%. In fact, the percentage of Republicans who approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing has actually, if anything, climbed a little bit according to our CNN polling. How about Quinnipiac? 87% before this whole Epstein saga started approved of the job that Donald Trump was doing among Republicans. Now It's 90%. So we see agreement between the CNN polling and the Quinnipiac polling. Yes, Republicans are not thrilled with how the government is responding to the Epstein case, but so far they are in fact not taking it out on Donald Trump, at least when it comes to his overall approval rating. Now you might be asking yourself, why? Well, I think this nugget gives it all away. Republicans who said the nation's top issue was the Epstein case, get this, 0, 1. One respondent, not 1%, one respondent of Republicans said that the nation's top issue was in fact the Epstein case. What we're dealing with is a public that is very much dissatisfied with how the government is responding so far to the Epstein case. A lot of folks, both on the right and the left, do in fact believe that the government is hiding Epstein's alleged client list, but yet when it comes to his approval rating, Donald Trump's approval rating with the Republican base, so far they're sticking with him because at this point, even if they believe the government is potentially hiding something, they don't think it's all that important.